watching Rogers TV.
Welcome to this episode of Food Bites. Now, Jay Stanford, who you're about ready to see, is an old friend of the food bank. He was on our board for a time, and we've known him for so many years, and he's just been great for us. But Jay helps to lead the city effort for the Curb Hunger food drive. It's had so many different emanations over the years, Jay. But what's been great about it is that the partnership is so strong. So as we move into this 28th one, I remember the very first one sitting down with you, and it was unique in Canada. And you came up with this idea of using blue boxes and collecting food. And I mean, it was a big hit. In fact, it became popular in many places across the country. But I do remember that the key reason why it was being done then was because the food bank back in those days was running, we had basically 3 food drives: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and spring. So the time between spring and Thanksgiving was a long time. It was 6 months. And you and your staff had worked it out that you thought it would be good if the food bank needed supplies in the summer to do it in January. And that was in June. And that was such a genius idea, because it really worked for us for all of those years. So we really appreciate it. Your staff is all in when it comes to this drive. They always have been, and you get so many different partners. How do you feel about it, or how does your staff feel about it this year? And also, like, you're the director of climate change and waste management. You're helping to do the Green Room program. So your fingerprints are all over all of these environmental things. How does the staff feel about it now? I know that your profile as a staff is expanding. How do they feel about this drive?
Well, everyone really looks forward to it each year. But it's those roots that you described are always so important too, because it really did have that focus on what could we do in addition to the Blue Box recycling program, where we're getting multiple benefits out of, in that case, one program. And that was, of course, the Blue Box. And it really began to resonate with the community. It took a couple of years to grow. And then it was a nice way for staff in the waste management area that many years ago, Glen, 28 years ago, to be saying it's more than a Blue Box program. It has other benefits in the community. So we carried forward that line of thinking. Every time we sat down with members of the food bank to get ready for the next year, it was always, what additional partners could come on board. And there was always that strong environmental connection. And that has grown over the years. And I think that has become really so important to all of this that, in December, you've got business cares. Thanksgiving and the March one, the Easter food drive, always kind of has that theme. But the environmental component, just so important. And that continues to grow. And in fact, over the last 5-6 years, we've really gone into even a better environmental direction, because we're helping to sort of further connect those dots, the dots between doing something wonderful for the community to help those in need, but at the same time getting that stronger environmental message, stronger environmental connection into the community, including what's becoming so important now, when you mentioned it, climate change. I'm just so lucky. So many of these items that are important are all within the area that I am very closely involved with. So it does make it easy to rally the staff behind this, because they look forward to it, because they all really get that connection. So it's just shaping up to be another good year here on the food drive. And as you know, we're starting on May 29th. We go through to June 8th. But I'll tell you, when you say that number, our 28th year together, it is just so positive. It's together, and so many faces have come and gone. You and I and Jane, well, we've been there since the beginning, and I always look forward to the new faces joining in, because that's how you grow a program. You grow strength into the community.
Yeah. The partnerships have been keeping, Jay, I remember back at the beginning, around that time, I was in Ottawa, and Al Gore came down and visited, and he had just won his Academy Award for Inconvenient Truth, and we spoke to him for a while. But back then, climate change was just really emerging in people's minds as something actually we should do something about. So that was interesting. And then there was the subject of food as well, which was out there. But the two were not necessarily linked. I know they were in the developing world, and I know they're linked in places like Sudan, where we work, and in other places. But I do think that those two things were basically along independent and separate tracks. We would have understood in our head that they somehow fit together. But I really think that the pandemic, and I think that the whole thing about the prices of food and people having trouble with the cost of living, all of those kind of things, it seems to me that those two separate tracks have now converged more or less into one. And the idea of food and food growth, collection, distribution, and the whole idea of climate change, even things like food waste, it seems to me that it's much easier to put those things into the same picture than it used to be. Is that how you feel about it?
Oh, absolutely. Because when you look at I hate to use the word routine food drives, because no food drive is routine. No. But the focus of non-perishable food and the wonderful work now to have fresh produce coming into the food bank has just been wonderful. But that connection with food has been something there that I've always been sort of scratching my head on. But it naturally evolved to that. And just as you mentioned with climate change, it became so key because people have got to understand that, food is a necessity of life, let's face it. But where we pick and choose where our food comes from is where we do have choices. And when we make a choice to have something come in from South America or southern states or even British Columbia, it comes with some other things that we're not always aware of. The transportation to get that food to us uses fossil fuel. Growing the food in these different locations uses not only energy sources, it uses water. But this whole food distribution system is becoming much more, the need to understand the importance of it from a climate change has just escalated in the last handful of years because the latest statistics continue to show that the food distribution system accounts for a third of the world's greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
So when we recognize that, we then say, for those very fortunate, we eat on a regular basis. For many, that's not the case. So understanding that dynamic of that system is just paramount because why would you waste any food in an environment that is consuming fossil fuels, which we've got to learn to have less of in the future? But this notion of food and food waste, whether it's in Canada, Ontario, or right here in London, it's something that people are beginning to talk about more. And a food campaign, like we call it now, allows us to do both. It allows us to talk about those in need in the community, those that have challenge with food insecurity and food security, but also that connection with climate change and making sure that we have a broader conversation. That the best time of the year to be doing that is really heading into those summer months. And that's why it's such a perfect fit, Glen.
Yeah. I do believe part of it, too, is that it's permeated the populace much more than previously. A good example would be, it was only 10 years ago, maybe 25, 26% of the food that we gave out as a food bank was fresh or perishable. Now it's over 55%. So, that's really significant. But I do think there are many different components to that. But I hear from everybody, like part of the reason why we changed and moved that way is because of the pressure from average citizens who wanted the ability to be able to donate fresh food.
Right.
A lot of those vehicles for doing so, let's say you drop it off in a bin somewhere to fire hall or a grocery store, it doesn't mean that we would get it right away. So that was always a complication. So now people donate online and ask that it goes towards fresh food. That makes sense. But I do think the public has changed and they're feeling, it's not just that they're feeling a challenge around food, they feel a certain comfort around it, that it's something that they can grow themselves, in their backyard or whatever it is that they're going to do, or they can take advantage of different opportunities that are there. But you helped us as we set up the community refresh program. If you remember, working with grocery stores, can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, well, that's I think we're now probably about 7 or 8 years old in that program, if not more. But that really got started where your good folks were in stores picking up, for the most part, perishable food. Oh, sorry, non-perishable, which is one of the key pieces of the food banks in the past. But we all know there's more nutritious food available, and quite often that was going out the back door. Now, studies were being done on food waste as a whole, not only from the sort of the household sector, but also from the commercial sector and the grocery store. And I think we just started reading more and more materials about stuff going off to landfill site. And right here in London, of course, that's one of the things that we own. But it allowed us to begin to think about there's got to be a better way of doing this. And I think a number of your grocery stores that have always been generous when it comes to food drives and allowing the ability to have the bins there and really promoting and working with their customers, many saw, wow, the additional benefit if a system was put in place with proper vehicles, proper storage, proper refrigeration, the ability to take something that was once going out as garbage and then to a landfill site because it was near the expiration date, it was being replaced by fresh produce coming in. I think your grocery stores, and there's so many in London right now, said, if you deliver a program, we will be part of that. And I think now, 7 or 8 years later, it's just a mainstay type program. And that's really helped to elevate fresh food into the food bank, but also just the ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by saying it's no longer going to the landfill site. And then also capturing the greenhouse gas emissions that are embedded in food by putting it to good use into the community. Like, to me, those stories, well, they're now part of the landscape. But there still, though, is, Glenn, too much food wasted in the household sector. And I'd like to, can I touch on that just for a bit first before we talk about urban agriculture? Sure. And the reason is that I use every opportunity possible. And your listeners here today have got to understand that even today with high prices in the grocery store, the data are showing that the average London household is still wasting about $1,000 worth of avoidable food waste per year. Now, that is a lot of money. But when you add that across the households in London, let's just bring that across 120,000 households. And I'm picking that number because those are the ones that have the new green bin service. That avoidable food is something that will add up to well over $100 million a year, probably closer to 120 million. So you just say to yourself, individual action matters. But when you look at that number in totality, it is significant. And let's face it here, we could all do something better with that amount of money. If you just took 10% of it, that's $10 to $12 million that would be in households' pockets. Money that they could spend on something else, money they could use as part of a donation somewhere, just something where it is not being wasted. I don't know, I just, when I think of that and people saying, taxes are going up, inflation's going up, this is something that you and I have the ability to control. Therefore, this is why that message is always so important, because those savings can be put into better use in our community. And for some, that better use will be supporting those that have less. So that's where I do think there's an appropriate connection, because it is a food discussion. And that discussion carries on. Even with the implementation of the green bin, and we'll touch on that later, that connection can't be lost.
Yeah, it is an irony, though, Jay. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, the moment that you provide community refresh programs, so organizations are able to divert food from the landfill that comes here, or even if it is a green bin, which we will touch on in a bit. And I mean, people waited for this for a long time. You've delivered on it. It's great. But there could be a tendency to say, well, now that I'm doing that and I can compost, I can buy just as much as I ever did. So I might not need 12 apples, but they're on sale in the bag, so I get them. Knowing that I can dispose of them now in a green bin, I mean, it's all important, and it allows individual citizens or grocery stores or others to take a part in it. But is the thing that we are going for, it should be don't waste as much. Develop more efficiencies within the system so that we don't end up with so much food waste every time we do some kind of transaction around food. Now, I'm not trying to dump on anything, but I do think that's why the education of the public is so important, that the key towards something like the green bin or community refresh is getting you to not waste as much.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important.
I know, and Glenn, that's kind of what we have built into the London Cares Curb Hunger, and we call it now the Food Campaign, because it allows us to do exactly what you said, to try to get those encouraging messages out there that help to connect the dots. Yeah. So food is essential in London. We know we need more. We also know that local food, urban agriculture are things that are on the rise. And I look at that as something that we do promote as part of our London Cares program, because you think of urban agriculture, just on the basic scale, that's growing something in your backyard. Yeah. Don't think of agriculture; it's the plot in your backyard where you are growing 3 rows for yourself and your family, and you grow 1 more row to give as a donation to the food bank. These are some easy pieces. And then urban agriculture on the larger side, you get into situations such as positive situations, such as Urban Roots the Farm on Logan Ave, where they have just grown leaps and bounds and are really community invested. That's on the east side of the city. On the west side, you have the Patch and the network there of growing food as well and making it available for those with less. So this notion of growing, and then the work done at the food bank on growing, it is creating and inspiring more people to understand that food comes from a grocery store, but food first and foremost has to be grown. And seeing food grown, I think, teaches an additional respect for food, especially when it's local.
Yeah, and then there's that special little part that's in the middle there. Let's say I'm a person who lives in an apartment, so I can't grow a raised bed garden or whatever it is. Up until just recently, we'll talk about that, I couldn't even green bin, right? But what the city had done and promoted as well through previous Curb Hunger food drive things is you had community gardens. So I might be in an apartment, but I could go down to a community garden in my area, take a plot and grow, right? So it really is filling out all of these opportunities. And we realize that some people will have an easier time of that than others, but we have to be patient till we get to the point where there's full participation in it. Can you talk to me about the green bin for the apartment side of things, because I think there's some new things that have happened there.
Oh yeah, no, we're really pleased. So just last week, basically, our multi-residential green bin pilot project was launched. And what we mean by that, of course, is that we did launch at the curbside back in January, but we've had a lot of discussions with medium and high-rise buildings. And many of them wanted to get involved in the program. And Council has provided support in the way of about $100,000 for 2024 to launch some pilot projects. So just last week, we managed to get 2 buildings up and running. And that was extremely exciting, too, because it is quite different than someone who lives with curbside service. Multi-residential, you've got to separate it. You've got to bring it down through an elevator quite often, or maybe down the stairs. You have to go down to a recycling or now a recycling and green bin area. So it's just a different dynamic. So 2 apartment buildings, as I said, launched last week. We have about another 5 to 6 that are just on the list to get to over the next couple of months. So that way we've got a new dynamic occurring for the multi-residential sector. And what's interesting, Glenn, is that it is a sector that the provincial government has identified that wants to see more action taking place by the end of 2025. So the reason for doing a pilot project here in London is that we do need some new learnings to share with other buildings that are here in London. There are about 900 buildings in London that a program like this could be made available to. People who, they're buying food right now. They have the same desires to buy fresh food where they can. And they probably have the same desires to help support others in need too. So this is where the community gardens connect service right now for the pilot project. So lots of good connections continuing to grow how food is managed in London, how food is grown in London, and how we basically take care of others in need.
Yeah. Do you know how much percentage of the population lives in those 900 buildings that you were talking about? Any idea?
Well, it's about 60,000 units. So if you just say, 1.5 to 2 people, so you're in the order of 90,000 to 120,000 people. There'll be some larger families, but quite often there's just one person. So, yeah, so let's just say 2. Let's round it, keep it real simple. 120,000 people.
That's unbelievable. Like, that's a lot. And if they were left out, that would be such a shame. But obviously you're working towards making this thing inclusive. What I love about it is that it's, me, I realize there's all sorts of organizations out there, food companies and others. But when average citizens get involved, right, we know that they're generous. And we know that they want to give to people that are in need. But it's what they want to give that has really changed. Back in the past, it was canned goods, non-perishable items that could stay in a fire hall for a while before they were brought. But the public themselves were pressing and pressing, right? They wanted people who were, falling on hard times to be able to have nutritious food and fresh food. And I mean, what you're doing is that you're setting the table for that to happen more and more. And it would be terrible if the people who felt like that and could do it were homeowners who had their own gardens, but others who felt even that way or even stronger couldn't do a thing about it because they didn't have the facilities. You're now making that kind of thing possible. I think that's a real renaissance, and it does fit beautifully, I think, with where just average people are at. I think they're starting to connect with food in totally different ways. You would agree, right?
Oh, absolutely. But it takes firing on all cylinders. You really, it's not a one and done. It's not just, and this is why this notion of a food drive, very, very important. But a drive has, maybe 7 to 15 days, very defined. By terming something a campaign, we capture both the food drive component, but we want to continue to share that message. And working with you folks at the food bank, your greenhouse on site, the Business Cares program, making smaller greenhouses available to others out in the community and church environments quite often. That, once again, I use the word connect the dots. All those people, all those programs have to work together, supporting one another to get that message to continue to elevate. And that's why I see growth continues to be exponential in this area, because more and more people are doing this. Right, just recently, a couple of the colleagues that we work with at Urban Roots and the Patch and the Kensington Village Association just completed an urban agriculture guide, a how-to guide. And, it's something there. They've created a nice little flyer. It's going to be something that's just going to add to the level of information that's out there right now to encourage more and more people to do things. So I get excited at that. I really do.
Me too. And I do think, we know the Patch, we know Urban Roots, we partner with those groups. We partner with Fanshawe on research, Kensington Village, we work with them as well. There's this collaboration, but they struggle to find their place within a community. There's a real need for it, but sometimes they need funding or they need the land, and they finally succeed in getting that. But the thing that will make it work in the end is not just the collaboration, it's average citizens supporting it. Purchasing the food from it, planting their own stuff and growing there. That's what will give it, I think, the real profile and the oomph to move ahead. And, we've learned that at the food bank, obviously, that it's the public that really drives that. And I think that one of the good things about the Curb Hunger Food Drive is that, what we're placing emphasis on is not so much the food bank. It's urban agriculture. And it's that these groups are out there, and if more and more of that kind of stuff happenings, food security gets built within the city, and people find food more affordable and more accessible, and also more dietary associated with whatever their needs are. And people don't require a food bank as much. So there's a real solution in that we have to work towards it. But without the public, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't work. It would just be all of these programs up and running. But it seems to me the public wants to make it work and wants to make it matter. And the Curb Hunger Food Drive is just Omaha Beach. It's putting the toe in the water, so to speak, and getting ready for what's going to happen. And I think you folks are helping to lead the way on that through this drive.
Yeah, no, that connection there, that's so important. And tying in the climate change aspect is
Yeah.
really key, because a lot of people will struggle on what can I do to improve things. I ride the bus already. I do get it. I carpool. I get on my bike. Those types
Yeah.
of things. I cool my home a little bit differently. So people make those changes. I think they're now beginning to think a little more about the food connection and growing locally.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And the more we talk about it, the more that connection comes in, because I do think people, their jaw hits the ground when you hear the number that the average household wastes $1,000 worth of avoidable food waste. And all that is food that should have been eaten. You put too much on your plate. You only ate half that sandwich. You scraped it into, now you can scrape it in the green bin, but before you were scraping it in the garbage, in part because you weren't taking the time to properly package and put it back into your fridge for the next day.
Yeah.
So these are habits. And I've chatted to so many people. 40 years ago, they weren't wasting food. Things have changed. But I do think the more we talk, you can go back to the old ways where we cared more about food because maybe our lives were a little bit not as busy. Maybe it's some of that just-in-time stuff. But food is just essential for a community, and having food available for everyone is a backbone of a community.
That's right. And we want the community to know we're all in this together. And I think that's the role that the city plays in this, right? Like you've drawn a number of different, sometimes disparate parts together, all the partners that you bring in to make this effort work. So let's just round, because we're almost out of time. Let's talk about that. It starts on May 29th, goes through to June 8th. How does it work? What can people do?
Well, it's... I guess there's so many choices. So let me package them up here. There's really two big ones when you really think about it. It's what can you do right now? And it's very simple here. Donations can be dropped off right at the grocery store. That hasn't changed. And that is a longstanding program that many people find is the most enjoyable way to participate. The other one that I believe gives just even greater flexibility to the food bank is when a financial donation goes in, because it allows you and the folks you work with, Glen, to match the needs a little bit better in the community. So I guess, money talks, it sure does. And I think anyone who has the ability to donate financially, either a one-time or on a regular basis. I know the Stanford Wholesale, we signed up for, comes out of our account once a month. It's just how much easier can it be for anyone to do that? So that's really helpful. Yeah. But then there's this whole component, Glen, of growing food. And that is grow food in your backyards through green walls, community gardens, or even volunteer at the food bank because you've got that wonderful garden at the back of your shop. And this notion of growing in the community, business cares and the support they can provide. This is all there. So just to repeat, do something right now at the grocery store in the way of non-perishable food products or basically a financial donation. Or the other one is, let's think about that growing. That takes more time and effort, but trust me, it is more rewarding. If you're not a gardener or don't have a garden in your backyard, there is one in your neighborhood. Get together with them. You have to do a little bit of pulling of weeds. We all know that. But when you finally start harvesting those food items, it is a wonderful experience. I'll tell you, it just brings instant warmth. And when you bring that down to the food bank, I've seen it eyes wide open, how quickly it goes on a shelf and how people smile when they take away fresh produce that has been grown here in London.
Jay, 28 years ago when we started, I had some hair. That's gone. Yours is all exactly the same as it was back then, so good for you. But the partnership has been fantastic. But I think this new level of moving into urban agriculture and dealing with climate change, you and your staff are doing a fantastic job at helping to lead that, and you're doing it in a way in which other groups like the Food Bank can be assisted through that. But congratulations on that, and pass along to your staff that means a lot to us, because as